how do you top a game that gives you 2 games for the price of 1? How about 1 game with a scale epic enough to make those 2 games seem positively tiny in comparison? Then take the established Fire Emblem formula and flip it upside down again. This game has more changes than Fire Emblem Gaiden, and yet with all these changes, it's unmistakably Fire Emblem. And unlike Fire Emblem Gaiden, this game ended up being one of the most beloved games in the franchise. Not only that, but many of these changes had a much more profound impact on the series as a whole. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Fire Emblem Seisen no Keifu, or Genealogy of the Holy Wars. Its gameplay and earth-shattering plot twists still attract intense debate to this very day. This game is famous for splitting the story into 2 generations. The first generation stars Sigurd while his son, Celes, picks up the second half. Each generation is long enough to be its own game, but since it's a continuing story, you must play through the first generation to reach the second. Plus, some of your actions in the first generation has a very big impact on the second generation. The characters in the first generation can get married and have kids. Kids you'll be controlling in the second generation. Outside of 2 pre-arranged couples, you have the freedom to pair characters any way you like. The children will inherit their parents' stats, skills, and weapons. But what happens if you don't pair up your characters by the end of the first part? Well, you get another set of replacement characters to use instead. The story for these replacement characters are almost identical to the kids, but they are much weaker in combat. Using the replacements could be considered the hard mode then. This is a very subtle way to increase the difficulty instead of a straightforward menu selection like other games. Pairing characters doesn't just benefit the second generation though. When a couple is married, they will give each other a boost in avoid and accuracy when they are in range of each other. When couples are adjacent to each other, there's a chance of activating a critical attack in battle. Actually, siblings also offer the same benefits and they don't require going through the pairing process. The support function that evolves in later games still pales in comparison to this lover system. I'm not talking about the second generation. I'm talking about the jealousy system that coexists with it. Jealousy is strictly for gameplay purposes and doesn't affect the plot. This is programmed into the game to let you speed up the pairing process if you understand it. Needless to say, with all these features built into the love system, players can get very creative in how they want to use it in battle. The other big addition is the weapon triangle. Think of the weapon triangle as a game of rock, scissors, paper. Using the right weapons against each other will boost your accuracy and avoid. The same applies to magic. It gives you just enough of an advantage to want to use it, but not enough to make it broken. If your stats are high enough, you can ignore the weapon triangle and still win a fight. Each class's stats has also been upgraded. Instead of a unified 20 caps like the previous games, different classes have different stats caps now. The different caps give each class more individuality. So even if you get lucky with defense growth, you'll still have an easier time tanking with a general than you would a sniper, due to the general having a higher defense cap. And if that's not enough, some classes are given extra skills. All generals have a skill tied to their class called Big Shield. This allows them to nullify damage, making them even better at tanking. Some skills like Big Shield activates at random, while other skills activate if they meet a certain requirement. There is another kind of skill called personal skills. They work the same way as class skills, but these skills can be passed down to their children unlike the class-based skills. This mixing and matching of skills is another way of customizing the children. You can create some powerful combinations this way. To further drive in the importance of inheritance, even something as simple as buying a weapon received an overhaul. Shops no longer provide an unlimited amount of weapons for purchase. If you buy a silver bow, then that's the only one you're going to get. So now you'll have to think about what you want to pass down as well as keeping your current characters armed for combat. Luckily, every castle has a forge to repair your weapons for a price, so weapons breaking won't be too much of a problem. Just like Fire Emblem Gaiden, Genealogy of the Holy Wars went and created a world map unlike any games before and since. Instead of a small map split over the course of 20 plus chapters, Genealogy has 12 chapters with massive maps. Each map is big enough to be multiple chapters from the other games. This opens up the map for more large-scale battles compared to the other games. Usually, you'll face an organized army instead of units scattered about. This changes the gameplay in subtle ways, but also serves to tell a story. A story involving large-scale war. It captures the look and feel of armies clashing. That's not to say that the previous games didn't send armies at you, but rather this game was designed more around it. From a gameplay standpoint, this forces you to think a little differently. The danger is less about overlooking an enemy at the side, and more about being singled out and swarmed to death. Other times they have elaborate formations that feels more like you're solving a puzzle. You'll try to find out who or what poses the biggest threat, and how to deal with that threat while staying alive. Using the gameplay to tell the story doesn't end just there. In an interview, Shozo Kaga said that he originally wanted to show that Camus was a skilled leader, but he had no way of expressing that in-game other than giving him high stats. So the leadership stars were created. Leadership is basically a modified version of support. A leader will give all units in range a boost to accuracy and evasion, and this ability is available to both you and your enemy. The more leadership stars someone has, the higher the bonus. Once again, this favors the large-scale battles that this game was designed around. The irony is that both of your main characters are given low leadership to prevent them from being overpowered. Let it be known that the world was saved by two underachievers. Those are just some of the bigger changes. I haven't even touched on the little things that's changed. Things like the arena operating differently, deploying units from a castle hub, the way critical attacks work, and even something as simple as exchanging items is different. A lot of these little things help make the game fresh, but the core mechanics are familiar enough that anyone can pick up and play. The plot for this game also starts with a clean slate. Gone is the continent of Vacania, and instead we're introduced to the continent of Yugdro, a continent that also had its own violent past that shaped it to the way it is today. You're not going to find Marth or even dragons in this game. Well, okay, they do play a role in the backstory of Yugdro. It does take place in the same world as Akania since it was referenced in the story. In fact, the divine dragon king Narga that saved Akania also had a hand in saving the people of Yugdro hundreds of years ago. Now, a simple betrayal of alliances would end up spawning a story that lasts 2 generations. The first generation starts with the country of Isaac invading the borders of Granbell. Granbell responds by sending out its main force to repel the invasion. With their main force off to war, the neighboring allies quickly turn hostile. The country Verdan breaks their alliance and invades. Sigurd, a young lord of Chaufi, rose up to defend his kingdom. Pretty soon, Sigurd is dragged deeper and deeper into battle while a sinister cult pulls the strings behind the scenes. What fleeting moments of happiness in Sigurd's life would be taken away from him when his beloved wife gets kidnapped, and his father branded a traitor. Eventually, Sigurd would have to fight his way back to Granbell to clear his name. This ends the first generation storyline. The second generation picks up 17 years after the first. Sigurd's only son, Celis, was sent away just before Sigurd would fight his way back to Granbell. The Yugdro continent was now unified under the Granbell Empire. What started as an age of peace led by Emperor Alvis quickly eroded. Slavery, suffering, and child hunts took place on all corners of the world. Celis had no choice but to lead a rebellion against the Empire. Along the way, Celis would gather the descendants of many soldiers who once helped his father. He'll discover just what happened to Alvis and who are these 12 gods that once saved the continent. Many loose ends from the first generation would be tied up here. This story is extremely detailed. What I told you barely scratched the surface. For example, it doesn't just start with the typical large empire threatening the world. We get to watch this empire come into power through political manipulation and military might. Villains had a deeper motivation that goes beyond personal greed. On the surface is a ruthless king committing heinous acts, but in reality is a man fighting for a better life for his people. Buried beneath all of this is the theme of prejudice. A cult of innocent people prosecuted and condemned because of the sins of their ancestors. Their hellish hiding place twisted their souls, and salvation lies in the revival of their dark god. Its subtle delivery can easily be missed if you don't pay attention. Another mix of gameplay and storytelling is the romance. Romance isn't just a gameplay feature, but also a driving force in the story. The romance also come in many different flavors. It ranges from sweet, tragic, and even scandalous. This game also dared to delve into forbidden romance between brother and sister. One of the biggest plot points in the story involves a complex romance. Example: Alvis. His mother, Sigyun, was a young woman who left her forest home to see the world. She marries the Lord of Veltimer, Victor, and gave birth to Alvis. Victor was not a faithful man. He had many affairs. One night while drunk, Victor rapes one of his maids, and this maid would later give birth to Alvis' half-brother, Azel. Her unfaithful husband caused Sigyun much grief, and during her grief, she met Prince Kurth. At first, the prince took pity on her, but as time went on, the two fell in love. When Victor found out, he lost his mind and committed suicide. The feeling of guilt drove Sigyun to leave Prince Kurth. She fled back to the forest and died shortly after giving birth to Kurth's daughter, Deirdre. Deirdre would later fall in love with Sigurd and become his wife. The spoilers starts now. During Sigurd's battle, Deirdre was kidnapped by the Loptos cult and offered to Alvis as his wife. Since Deirdre was the only child of Prince Kurth, marrying her would make Alvis the heir to the Grand Bell throne. Devoid of her memories, Deirdre marries Alvis. With the throne secured, Alvis had only one worry left: Sigurd. Alvis' love for Deirdre is real, but he's afraid that seeing Sigurd might help her regain her memories and cause her to leave him. For the love of Deirdre and creating a kingdom where his cursed bloodline wouldn't be prosecuted, he was willing to sacrifice Sigurd. He sets up a hero's welcome for Sigurd's return, but
Sigurd was immediately executed, while his army was ambushed, and the fate of his troops remained unknown.
Genealogy of the Holy Wars also has one of the largest cast of characters in any Fire Emblem. I think Radiant Dawn might be bigger, but who's counting? Even though this game didn't have detailed support conversations, a majority of the cast has enough personality to be memorable. Some more fleshed out than others, of course. Outside of love chats, there are extra dialogue and character interactions sprinkled throughout the game. Another thing that makes Fire Emblem characters so special is that they age and grow. Seeing characters you know and love age further enhances the feeling of an epic tale. This would also turn a seemingly minor character into a fan favorite because he is playable in both generations. He would also play a major role in the next game. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. The Fire Emblem in this game is only mentioned in the ending. This emblem is merely a family crest that symbolizes justice. You could say the Fire Emblem is merely a cameo in Fire Emblem. Even the dragons who played an important role in the previous games are missing. They do serve in the background, but this story is purely human versus human drama. The story of the Yudro Saga doesn't end just here. I purposely left out mentioning some characters because I'm saving them for the next episode. Besides, this episode is long enough as it is. Next time we tackle a side story to Genealogy of the Holy Wars and join Prince Leaf as he fights to reclaim his kingdom. We tackle my first Fire Emblem, Fire Emblem Thracia 776.